Hanratty was the killer. The court heard that after having a drink together, Storey and Gregston had driven to Dorney Common near Windsor. Suddenly, there was a sharp tap on the driver's window. It was a man holding a large black revolver. He got into the car and ordered Gregston to drive further down the lane and into a field. The man, who said he was on the run from the police, then made Gregston drive back towards London. The journey ended at Deadman's Hill, just outside the village of Clophill in Berkshire. Gregston was told to park off the road. After binding Storey's hands, the gunman shot Gregston twice in the head. He then forced Storey to pull Gregston's body out of the car and dump it at the side of the road. Storey's kidnapper then began firing at her in the dark. Storey pretended she was dead, heard the car drive off, and slumped into unconsciousness. Hanratty denied everything, first claiming he'd been in Liverpool on the night of the murder, then saying he'd been staying in a guest house in North Wales. The trial lasted a month and attracted a great deal of attention. On the 17th of February 1962, Hanratty was found guilty and sentenced to death. An appeal was launched immediately by Hanratty's shocked family and other supporters. 90,000 members of the public signed a petition, which was given to the then Home Secretary, Rab Butler. But it was all in vain. In the early hours of the 4th of April 1962, Hanratty was hanged. Hanratty's conviction has courted controversy ever since, particularly since it was based largely on Storey's identification in the lineup, which many have argued was flawed. In 1967, Peter Alphon, the first suspect, appeared at a press conference in Paris confessing to the murder and saying he'd been paid £5,000 to break up Storey and Gregston, a married man.
And that's what I said at the press conference, and I'm going to stand by it.
But in a 1974 inquiry into the case, Home Secretary Roy Jenkins agreed with the original verdict. In 2001, Hanratty's body was exhumed and the case reopened, but DNA evidence placed him at the scene of the crime, and in 2002, the conviction was upheld. 13 years before Hanratty was executed, a small plane made 2 secretive flights over the English Channel. On each occasion, the pilot dropped mysterious packages into the water below. In October 1949, farm worker Sidney Tiffin was hunting along the Essex marshes when he spotted what appeared to be a large, bulky package floating among the reeds. When he reached down, he recoiled in horror. The package contained a headless torso. Tiffin secured his grisly find to a stake to prevent it floating any further and fetched the local police. A leading pathologist managed to lift fingerprints from beneath the skin of the badly swollen hands. Police records revealed that the prints belonged to Stanley Settee, a wealthy 46-year-old London businessman. Settee had disappeared 2 weeks before the discovery of the torso. By the end of the Second World War, Settee had established himself as one of the leading used car dealers in London, a strictly cash business. And Settee rarely had less than £1,000 on him at any one time. The large, distinctive £5 banknotes were unusual enough for people to remember if they were given one. Taxi driver Owen Rawlings said he'd been paid with such a note when he drove a man from an airfield at Southend back to London around the time Settee disappeared. Police sped to the airport, where Chief Flying Instructor Keats told them about a recent client's odd behaviour.
He struggled out of the car with a very large parcel that was wrapped up in some brown wrapping tied up with string. I watched him struggle for a minute or two and then felt obligated to offer him my assistance. But when I approached him, he very furtively tried to say, "I don't want your assistance, don't come near me. I've got some fish here," he said, and at that I walked away from him.
Flight records showed that the man who'd been acting so strangely was 29-year-old Donald Hume, known to be a close associate of the late Stanley Settee. Hume was taken to the police station, where detectives listened to a tale about 3 men who had offered him £150 in £5 notes to drop 3 parcels into the English Channel. Police then conducted a thorough search of Hume's North London home. Forensic tests showed traces of blood on the top surface of the floorboards and more underneath. The carpet, which had been taken to a nearby cleaner, bore traces of a bloodstain in one corner. Armed with what appeared to be damning evidence, police charged Hume with Settee's murder. When the Second World War broke out in 1939, Hume joined the Royal Air Force and was an excellent pilot. After being injured during a practice flight, he had to resign after just a few months. At the height of the Blitz, Hume profited from the black market by rebottling rubbing alcohol and selling it to London nightclubs disguised as gin. Eventually, business waned and Hume went straight for a while, running an electrical repair company which thrived in the bomb-damaged streets of London. However, by 1948, the firm was bankrupt, and Hume moved into the used car market, where he met Settee. Hume's trial started at the Old Bailey in January 1950. The sensational murder case attracted huge interest from the public. Apart from the bloodstains in his home, which were not necessarily Settee's, the evidence against Hume was mostly circumstantial. Hume repeated the story that 3 men had paid him to dump the parcels in the sea, and that he had no idea what they contained. The jury failed to reach a verdict on the murder charge, and Hume was acquitted. But he was jailed for 12 years for being an accessory to murder. In 1958, Hume was released. In an astonishing interview, he confessed that he was guilty of Settee's murder. He said they'd had a furious argument. Hume had his temper and stabbed Settee with a dagger. He dismembered the body with a hacksaw and packed it into 3 separate packages. He then hired a plane and made 2 trips over the English Channel to dump Settee's bloody remains. But he hadn't counted on the wind and the tides, washing the torso up along the Essex coast 2 weeks later. Immune from prosecution, Hume moved to Switzerland, where in January 1959 he attempted to rob a bank, shooting dead a taxi driver. He was arrested on the spot. After 17 years in jail, Hume was returned to Britain. Examined by 2 psychiatrists, he was taken to Broadmoor Hospital for the criminally insane. Careful police work and ballistic evidence brought the killers of Police Constable George Gutteridge to the gallows in 1928. A television program helped locate John List 18 years after he slaughtered his entire family. James Hanratty was hanged for a savage murder in 1962 after being identified by the victim's companion. And Donald Hume was acquitted of murder, but later confessed to the bloody crime.